Alright, YouTube, it's time for Occult Literature Video 58 on King James Demonology. Extremely good work, comes highly recommended. One of the best. It's right up there with the Petit Albert as far as how interesting a read it is. It goes well beyond just being academic. You know, some of these these texts are kind of dry. They're not as entertaining. This, totally different story, very entertaining, even if you're looking at it mostly as like fictional, sort of Protestant, early Judeo-Christian witch, the Burning Time sort of lore. Link in the description to where you can purchase my edition off of Amazon. It is the cheapest, as always. Second, link to my books blog, where you can find, if you're interested in this kind of text, there are plenty of other philosophical and spiritual texts. I've got the Book of Tobit. I've got a lot of other stuff. I've got some of Trithemius' work, lots of alchemy, grimoires. It's all there. King James I was notable for being literate. And I don't say that jokingly, because many monarchs, nobles, and people around that time period, they couldn't even write their own name. He was a different story. He was more into academics. This treatise in 3 books is about 75 pages in length. Now, even post-dating the printing press, which had come out in the 1400s, the idea of somebody of noble stock as opposed to somebody of the clerical class, or somebody who is sort of independently doing these things as like a court wizard or something. The idea of them actually not just, reading things, which was, some of them did, some of them didn't, but actually taking the time to write something, especially on a spiritual topic, was almost unheard of, actually, at the time period. This is sort of the early Renaissance period. Interesting time, really, in world history. I mean, mid-Renaissance, sorry. King James wrote this primarily on the topic of witchcraft. That is what we would consider sort of Burning Times material. But it goes a lot further than that. It goes into the very nature of Satan according to the Protestant movement, as opposed to, and he lambastes them constantly in this work, the Catholics. The Catholics, by this time period, had sort of accepted the concept that there were spiritual forces that were supernatural, but not inherently evil. They were apart from the Christian God, but through that same virtue were able to heal. They didn't have as much of a problem with white witches, so-called, that simply healed people, or they depossessed individuals. That is, that someone was possessed, somebody was sick, or somebody had been bewitched, someone's home was haunted, they'd come in and take care of it. That was considered generally to be okay under Catholicism. Under the Protestant lore, though, of the era, and King James spells this out quite clearly, only prayers to God were acceptable. If you were sick, pray to God, because it's either because he's testing you, in which case you can pray for deliverance, but, maybe it will become a point of entry into the true religion. For others, they'll see your fortitude, they'll see that you suffer, but you never give up faith, and so they become part of this movement, because, wow, these people are so zealous, I should become a Protestant instead of being a barbarian, sort of pagan, or a Catholic, or whatever. Or, you're a sinner, you deserve it, you're being punished by God, and you need to repent. And it's taken in here that those that are actually bewitched oftentimes are guilty of sin, and that's the methodology by which they became bewitched in the first place. Because to King James and the others, under most circumstances, a person who was very pious was immune to witchcraft. Not always. Sometimes it was a test of their fortitude, like he draws a comparison to the book of Job. Most of the time, though, is because they have done something wrong. They deserved it. He talks about, for instance, the fact that at the time period, there were, in his mind, more witches and more evil spirits roaming the land, was the result of the fact that Satan actually was trying to trick the Catholics that had held England before his time period. The idea was that the devil would allow the Catholics to delude themselves into thinking that they could cast out demons and so forth, in order to destroy their faith in what he considers the true Protestant religion. The idea being Satan would pretend that the Catholics had power, just like he would pretend to be constrained by the necromancers or the witches, when in reality he was the master the whole time. He was only pretending to be hurt by their rituals. He was only pretending to give in to their demands. He'd give them a few little things here and there. Ultimately, he claimed their soul, and he won in the end. Like a grand master at chess or something, feigning a moment of weakness while setting something up to utterly decimate their opponent who has become too headstrong. It goes into the nature of demons, and to King James, most of the demons share one common classification. Then there are the fairies, which are demons but under a different guise. That is, the natural or airy spirits of Catholicism are simply the same sort of demons acting in a different manner, appearing in a different form. He goes on to dispel some of the claims of the time period as well. And we shouldn't be too hard on King James. This is burning time stuff. They obviously, mostly, they were killing people who had cerebral palsy, or people who had epilepsy, or people who had some mental illness, or they had gotten into some bad rye and they had gotten ergotamine poisoning. That's true. But to people who didn't understand modern science, who didn't understand mental illness or microscopy and some of these things, he actually formulates this in a pretty damn academic manner. So props to King James I, Christian as though he may have been. He was a sharp wit, obviously. He sets this up in the form of a dialogue between Philomathus and Epistemon, two sort of fictional characters. He sets it up in the form of a Socratic dialogue to make it more interesting to the reader as well. Increasingly, the middle class at the time, post-Black Death era, was becoming more literate. There were more people able to read these things, not just the clergy like it had been a couple of centuries before, generally speaking. He goes into a great deal more material as well. He mentions, for instance, why the barbarians of the far north, and he mentions Finland, Orkney, and some of these regions, were more given over to being possessed, more given over to practicing witchcraft. He goes into, of course, why women more often than men were the ones that were blamed for witchery, and generally forms a fairly good academic work within the boundaries of science as then understood. Very good work. If you want the premier look at demonology from the earlier Protestant perspective, this is the best work ever penned within that sort of subgenre of demonology. There is none better. Not modern, not semi-modern, not from, the older period. It's this one that is the premier work within that. Now, I understand that there were a handful of illustrations in the original edition. There's no reason to include them. It's literally just academic dialogue. It's just like the Keys of Alchemy by Basil Valentine. Somebody attempted to excoriate the ratings on Amazon, saying, oh, it doesn't have the illustrations. The woodcuts weren't original, and they don't actually do anything to illustrate the text beyond simply illustrating the point of the headers. They don't actually contain any real alchemical lore to them, so why bother including them, driving up the page count and thus the price? It's not necessary. With this work, you're talking about summary illustrations of King James and Satan. Who cares? It doesn't matter within the context of the text, except to show, well, this is the person who wrote it, the illustrious King James I or King James IV of England or Scotland, and this is the devil as imagined by the Renaissance-era audience. So again, link in the description to where you can purchase my edition off of Amazon. If you're looking for a short list of the works I consider the best, of all of those that I have edited, as opposed to writing. Of course, I'm partial to my own writing anyway, I wouldn't have written it. I'd say morbid stories, fictionally, and in non-fiction, Fruits of Eden. For edited works, this would be number 2 after the Petit Albert, and ahead of the Grand Grimoire, the Black Pullet. Extremely, extremely exceptional work by King James I. Here I am, I'm giving glowing praise to somebody who's talking about how evil Satan is and how we should burn the witches. So it's actually kind of funny. If a person who has generally no respect for Judeo-Christianity can appreciate this text, I think that most other people can as well. That's about all. Peace out.